So welcome to everyone to our New York real estate practice panel. We're very excited today to be able to bring you some insights into the differences between doing business in New York and Connecticut, because although we're very close geographically, Christine, would you say we practice the same? No, we need you to unmute. Unmute, darling. And Diane too, if you would. And everybody else stay muted. So Christine, it's kind of different, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is, but I think you have to look at the characteristics of the state are different as well.
Correct. That's correct. So what we want to do today is not do an exhaustive review of how these two practices are different. For that, you really need to take classes with the continuing education in New York, as well as the MLS that you become a member of. And their classes are superb. So look for those opportunities if you decide that you're going to be practicing in New York, to make yourself strong and confident about your practice. The basic outline for today is we want to talk about, speaking of continuing education, the licensing requirements, which have changed recently. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Also, then how the individual practice of working with sellers, working with buyers, working with landlords, and working with tenants. And I'm going to show you online some of the unique documentation and some of the ways that the documents are different. But we're going to let our panel basically do the elaboration for you. So Dee, would you like to talk just a little bit about the change in licensing process?
Yeah, sure. Up until this, I think was it this year that they changed it with reciprocity. If you were licensed in Connecticut, you did not have to take continuing ed in New York, and that changed. Now we have to do 22.5 credits in New York, in addition to Connecticut, if you were licensed here primarily in Connecticut. And they have a huge amount of Zoom classes available that you can go on, and that needs to be done before your license, and they report them to the state. I did some calling around, so it will go to the state and they will look at it, and they will see if you have completed these credits. And there are certain requirements that are not and then there are electives thereafter. So you really need to take a look and see what you need to do and take them. And the ethics, for example, had I known this, I took the ethics here, the NAR ethics. That does not go back over there. If I had taken it there, I probably could have used it here. However, I didn't. So they have an ethics class there that I will probably take. However, I don't want to get caught into the particulars because there's a lot of information today. So you can go online at One Key, and there are a plethora of courses and things to take and sign up for each month.
Right. Yeah. And their training is really quite excellent.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other comments on that from anybody? I think that when you're dual licensed, I think looking for the classes that are specifically New York oriented are a good practice, a good idea to do. And with all those hours, you have plenty of opportunity. So who would like to talk a little bit about, let's start with buyers. How do we practice a little differently in New York with buyers? Let me just ask this. What is the law of buyer agency in New York?
You don't have to sign. You don't have to sign the buyer agreement. It's not a law.
Okay, so in Connecticut, you must sign a buyer agreement before you work with buyers. In New York, no. In Connecticut, what about agency disclosure, Diane?
There is one, but it's kind of like a dual designated one. So sometimes I have people sign it in advance, but sometimes I wait until there may be a dual agency situation.
Well,
It-
there is, sorry to jump in.
Go ahead, Christine.
Okay, so there is a document called New York Agency that is very similar to what it is in Connecticut, where it explains what a seller agent does, what a buyer agent does, dual agent. That is a mandatory must sign
Oh,
prior
okay.
to showing and or listing.
Yeah,
So
That
I'm going
alone-
to share my screen. Hold on one second and keep talking, Christine, but I'm going to share the screen and show you what this document looks like. One moment.
And
keep
the other mandatory, before I show anybody anything document, is the new, came out a year ago, the fair housing, which again is just more of a disclosure of here's what fair housing is and how we must abide by it. And please sign on the dotted line that you're aware of.
Okay, and those documents are all available right on the MLS website.
yes.
Mhm.
Correct.
Mhm. So this is what the the agency disclosure form looks like. It says straight out, it's not a contract. It does not establish agency. It just tells you about agency. And then you can choose. And can you work with buyers in New York with agency agreements?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yes, you can. So it's basically the opposite of Connecticut. In Connecticut, you need the agency agreement. New York, no. Connecticut, the agency disclosure is optional, although highly recommended. In New York, it is obligatory. Okay, so it's just backwards. And that's what that looks like. And you see what Diane is talking about. It includes this dual agency part, but you can have just the designation of buyer agency and hold off on the dual agency until it becomes relevant.
right. Like I'll put TBD. for my
Exactly.
seller, Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What else, Christine?
In terms of mandatory for buyers, it's the agency that you just went over and then the fair housing document.
Okay.
Once
And
you have those two signed, it's your choice whether you want to show them a buyer representation agreement and go through that with them. While they're signing documents is a good time to discuss it. And then but mandatory are the first two documents, then you can go out and show.
correct. Okay. What do you
Can I
guys?
Add something? I mean,
Sure,
just,
of course.
I mean, it's representation. I think if everybody goes to the point of just explaining representation and why we do it, I think you just go back to the basics of representation and why it's so important to be represented. I just want to add that and not get caught up in, and explain it's not mandatory, but I'm here to represent you.
Right, which ultimately means
yeah.
negotiate on your behalf,
Exactly.
represent your best interests,
Correct. Yeah.
perform due diligence, et cetera. Okay. Okay. So it's just a regular buyer consultation.
Mm-hmm.
Then talk about the process of showing properties in New York.
There are
Diane,
a lot of times,
looks like you're amused.
I am amused because a lot of times they don't go by showing time. You have to call the office, which is sometimes annoying because if you're trying to make an appointment at 11 p.m. or something, you can't. And then a lot of times I've just been putting it into showing time. And then if it really restricts it, then I'll call. But sometimes some of them have both, but they put the office number and you don't always need to do that.
So you really have to look at the listings to see what your options are as far as that goes. And then what about access? How do they set up for gaining access to properties?
Supra, combo lockbox. Sometimes the agent will show you, not as much as Greenwich, but sometimes the agent will show you different, I mean, it ranges.
I don't know. Tell me if you guys all agree with this. I find that there are more combo boxes in Westchester particularly than here. Would you say that is true?
I think
Depends
it's
on where.
changing. I think it's changing because the lock boxes are changing. And we're going through a big switch right now. And so we could talk about that for a bit too, if you want, or you want to wait till later. It's up to you. You know, the lock boxes were the same as here, and now they're changing their system. And that's, I think a lot of people, because of cost and the system changes, some people are going to combos.
Okay.
I don't know if that's everybody else's experience, but
Well, yeah, there's a lot of agents that are, especially in Lower Westchester, there's a lot of agents that are coming from the Bronx and they don't have access to HGAR or One Key. So they'll call up and they're like, well, you know, can you let us in? Or do you have a combo there? And, you know, that was a learning experience for me, but most of them either came to the open house or whatever, so.
So are most of you practicing primarily in Westchester County in New York, or do you go outside of Westchester County?
Mostly Westchester.
I go to Putnam and some of the other counties as well, because I'm up north.
Right.
Okay. Okay. And
I do
Christine,
Westchester too, obviously.
how about you, Christine?
Yeah, I'm mostly central, northern Westchester and Putnam. I have gone to Dutchess, southern Dutchess.
Okay.
Right. I'm from Westchester, so my database is mostly Westchester. So I kind of operate throughout Westchester, although I do want to give a shout out to John Rios, and he is in Yonkers. Not only, but, you know, pretty steadily in Yonkers, so he knows it really well.
So that would be a resource for folks. So I'm going to share my prejudice, basically, which is for agents who really, like Diane is saying, is from Westchester and knows Westchester well. Christine, I know as well, has an intimate understanding of the county. I like dip my toe across the border, but I don't go deep into the counties because I want to maintain my fiduciary relationship with my client. And I think that's really important to really know the territory before you get deeply ensconced in it. So Rios is a good resource for if you find people going south of the typical Westchester.
Yeah, and I think similar to Connecticut, that holds true town by town as well in Westchester, because a town like, or a city like Yonkers is not going to operate the same as the town of Pound Ridge, as an example.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Like Hartford to here. I mean, it's totally different.
Talk about the inspection process with buyers. What's the expectation in terms of timing? I mean, here we typically say within 7 days or something like that. What do you find the expectation is in New York?
In this market, 48 hours.
What?
Very fast.
Really?
Well,
Or you
remember,
can get outbid
you have a non-binding
with
agreement.
no binders, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Let's-
so,
let's pedal down that path because that's another huge distinction. And Christine, what I have is, we use this as a template. It's one of your letters of intent. So watch this and you can could you walk us through it? Let me go here and here. So does the buyer sign anything when they put in an offer?
The buyers do not sign anything when they put in an offer, and the seller does not sign anything when they accept an
That
offer.
is so foreign to me.
However,
Yeah, talk about that.
however, there is a document that if you want a signature from the seller, there is a document that is in the MLS, and the name is escaping me of it, but it's basically confirmation from the seller that they received the offer.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
we'll
it's-
go into that contents and I'll find it in a little bit. Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's called offer submittal acknowledgement. And it also includes the terms of the offer. So if you want something with the seller's signature on it, you can get it, but you're getting it for a reason other than acceptance, which is just, it was presented to me.
Okay, so Christine, walk us through the information that you put in this letter of intent or offer. You call it a memorandum of offer for a property address.
Right. So when you submit an offer, it's important for the strongest offer for it to be on your letter, right? To make sure that it's not just an email that says, you know, here's 3 things: the purchase price, the time of the inspection, and what we're inspecting. It's important to formalize it in some way. It looks a lot stronger to the seller than if it's just an email. And so we put in the same information as you would in Connecticut for either the standard form or the binder, which is give the seller information that you have, provide your buyer's information, their name, their current address. Type of offer is, I mean, obviously you know what that is. It's an offer to purchase. The date that you're submitting the offer, the purchase price, what their down payment is going to be. Because remember, in New York, you don't have to put the 1% down with the offer. So what are you going to be putting down at contract? And what are you going to be bringing to the closing? And then again, the inspection information. When is it? What are you going to be inspecting? Now remember, in Westchester, the seller is responsible if they have a well to run a water panel prior to closing. So there's no reason for a buyer to do that well test or water testing, but in Putnam County, as an example, you would. In Dutchess, you would, except for East Fishkill, because East Fishkill has the Westchester requirement. So those
Like
types of
that.
things are important to know.
We need a chart.
Right.
Hmm.
So, and then you would give the basically the terms. So, when are you going to be doing the contract? Where am I? Any
Here.
other contingencies that you're going to be putting in there other than inspection? Obviously, appraisal, clear title, things like that are important. This one happens to be a foreclosure that you're looking at with a lot of information taken out. But by the way, Michael Verga, as the attorney, he's spectacular. So if anybody wants his information, it's right there.
So, and I would think also that you ladies have kind of your team of
Yes,
vendors in New York.
Right.
One of the things that I think we don't often think about is septic people. The septic people we use in Fairfield County may or may not, usually not, be
Lots.
licensed in New York. So
Not.
they can't help you. You need a team of New York vendors. You need licensed inspectors in New
Right.
York. What else do you need? If you have repairs that need to be done, electricians or plumbers, same gig.
right.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
So, and certainly attorneys. And I think it's just as in Fairfield County, we don't like to work with people who are in New York as much as people who are in Connecticut. It works the opposite for New York transactions. It's ideal to have somebody who's actually in New York representing your New York purchasing buyer.
Well, and remember that in New York, the person who is the attorney for your client is essentially also taking the role of broker questions that you would have in Connecticut, because things aren't as standardized as they are in Connecticut. Normally, even if you went to your broker, it would be referred back to the attorney to make that decision, right? Just like in the easiest example is in Connecticut, we have a standardized rule for property condition disclosure. In
Oh,
New York, that's a decision for the attorney. And if the seller really wants to sign it, you can't say, here you go, sign it. They have to have that conversation with their attorney because it's a legal decision. It's not a real estate decision.
Mhm.
So it's super important who you team with. And I'll tell you, the one thing that makes my heart drop or my stomach drop is when a client says to me, oh, I have my own attorney. It's like, okay, can I vet them, please?
Mhm. Yeah.
And if people are moving to Connecticut, it's a good idea to see if you can find an attorney that is licensed in both states.
Crosses the lines.
Mhm.
Yes.
I agree. I have a great attorney who is licensed in both,
Mhm.
and she's also accessible, which is another great thing.
Mhm.
So you have identified the two attorneys, and then the second page is just that.
The second
Convenient.
page, this is where you would give the information, and it's super important that you give license information, which isn't right up front in Connecticut. And so everybody, here is where you can find the Keller Williams broker license number right on this document. And if you need the other attorney's information, their license number is both in the MLS or on a site called, is it e-access? I have
I
to
think
look.
it's-
Yeah, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's e-lookup basically, and I think it's called e-access, but we can get the link out to everybody.
And it's easier to do it on the MLS like it is here, but
Right.
but there some may not be in the MLS.
You might not be able to find their broker
Right.
license information
Broker
in the
license,
MLS, but
right.
the
That's
agent
right.
information.
Okay, cool. Any questions on that letter of intent or memorandum of offer? Anybody have any questions on that? Good. Cool. Okay, so you talked a little bit about disclosures. Oh, you know what? Talk about closing dates. Because this is fascinating. You know, look at them laugh.
So
It's
it's
different.
really not,
It's a little different.
it really, everybody laughs at that, and it really is quite simple. It's an on or about date. So that means here is a date for the bank to work towards, right? The closing date will be on or about this particular day, and the seller, standard contract language, the seller cannot delay the closing for more than 30 days, right? So the seller can delay a closing by a week, seller can delay a closing by 2 weeks because they're not ready to go, but they cannot delay it for more than 30 days.
So what is the practical application that you see? I have had this happen pretty consistently. What do you see in terms of closing dates? You write a
see-
date on the offer,
Right?
it goes into the contract,
As an on or about.
and
I have the same experiences as I do in Connecticut, where it says the closing date will be on this day or mutually agreed upon. The date in the contract in both states are meant for the date that the bank is working towards. And so my experience in both states is the banks are backed up. Some banks are pushing things through and making it ahead of time, and then we actually stick to that on or about date. And some banks are 2 and 3 weeks behind. But at the end of the day, it's not about the date in the contract so much as how the banks are working towards that date.
okay,
gonna-
that's a little different perspective than my
Yeah.
experience, but that's interesting. I'm fascinated to hear it. That's good. Thank you.
I'm gonna say it's setting expectations. I think that's what Christine is getting towards, setting expectations and using the right words with your buyers so that they are not expecting to close on the exact date that you write. And setting the expectation, it's on or about, as she said, and it's on or about, and here are this is what it means. This is the possibility of what could happen. In Connecticut, we tend to be a little tighter on that. My experience is a little bit different. I've not had anything not close within a few days, okay? And that's, I think, the experience of the people listening, generally speaking. It's a little bit different in New York, and as long as you set that expectation to the buyers, I believe we won't have as much disappointment or a different expectation. So if you set it up front, and that's the law there, that's how it's written. It's a different terminology.
It's a different terminology, and yet it's the same. I think what I'm trying to get at is it's not so much about the date that you're putting in the contract, it's about how the bank is working towards that. And that's true in both states because you can't close without the bank.
Right. Okay. And so they basically have 30 days without penalty to close from a given date.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And talk a little bit about title, because I have found that to be a little bit more challenging also in New York.
Yeah, title searches go a bit longer in New York. It's a different process there. And whereas, title here in Connecticut, we have attorneys that do that. It's a different process. It just takes longer.
Well, and I think
title.
that probably connects with what Christine is saying about bank timing. Because that's all
You
tied
need
up
the
with
title done and clear title, and all of that needs to be in place for the bank to get everything completed as well. So if it takes 30 days to get title, let's just say, I'm just doing an example, it's going to take longer to close and get all the paperwork done on the bank side. So whereas here, it tends to take a little shorter to get title completed.
Well, there's less entities to go through in Connecticut than there are in New York. So you're
Correct.
waiting.
That's right.
I will put the disclaimer here to everyone. If you are working in a town that also has a village, the villages are running about 6 to 8 weeks on title turnaround.
Yep.
Not towns, not the county, but the villages.
So that's another thing that's kind of different, isn't it? It's the town, the makeup of the town. And
The structure in how the state is organized does require that the title search is looking for more people, more entities to respond to them.
okay. Mhm. Interesting.
And some require an actual inspection. Some of the towns actually require an inspection of the property. I've had that happen, like in Peekskill, where they have to actually come out and see the property. So that takes scheduling.
John, are you saying something?
Yeah, so one thing with New York, and I think that we have to kind of address is, like everyone else mentioned, depending on what municipality you're in, there are some, and I want to be very clear with everyone that has not done business in New York. There are some municipalities that are not digital, and their Department of Buildings have paper records. And if the bank is requiring a survey and there's no pre-existing survey on file, then a new survey has to be done. And there are many delays in the title process that can really drown. I mean, we just closed on one now that was in contract for 9 months. That's
Wow.
in some municipalities and some hamlets and some villages, it can take a lot of time for those things to get done, especially in cases where it's a property that predates C of Os and there's no pre-existing C of O, there's no survey, there's no meets and bounds. Someone has a shed on the edge of a property line and things get really misconstrued. So it can take it can be a big delay in some of the properties with title.
So John, let me ask you this. How did you set expectations with your buyer on that? And how did they ever stay in a transaction for 9 months?
Right.
Holy
So-
cow.
So when it comes to setting those expectations, I'd rather over promise and under deliver, or however vice versa that may be. I like to let them know, hey, this on the extreme end could take 6 months, and in a perfect world, it could take 45 days. And I just want to be very clear with them, especially if it's a property that's located in an area that I know can take some time. Peekskill is one of them. Carmel is another one, very dated. You know, they've got an old paper filing system. So depending on where the area is, I'll let them know, you know, from the beginning, hey, you're looking in this area. This is what their Department of Buildings normally does. This is how long things are taking. This could extend your property closing by X amount of time. And I kind of overshoot just to give myself more of a cushion. But in reality, the contract date is really what's going to be, you know, the end all be all.
And just to be clear, we're just talking about a plain vanilla property transfer. We're not talking about a short sale or bank-owned property. No, it's just
No.
plain vanilla.
No, we're
Fascinating. Mm.
I'm going to add, I mean, John's mentioned something about something being on a property line. That happens in Connecticut and it delays a closing here too. I mean,
Correct.
if something's on a property line or there's a deck that is too close to a property line, that stops it here as well. So, you know, it all depends on what we're talking about. I mean, I've had things come to a screeching halt until there's resolution. So that's not any different than Connecticut either. I mean, we can't have people buying things that are and closing on something that's not legal. So I just want to be clear to the group that that doesn't, we don't go forward in Connecticut either. So just, right, John? I mean, right? Do you agree?
no, absolutely.
So it slows it down here for months. I've had things stop for months here as well, just to be clear. Difference, same thing.
Do
Yeah.
we have any last words on buyers? Anybody with a last thought on buyers before we move into sellers?
Well, one of the things I would say based on what John was just talking about, it is super important, and I know we're supposed to do this in Connecticut as well. So it's not a difference, it's just a reminder. It is
Right.
super important that when you're putting in an offer, that you fill out, whether it's paper, as John was talking about, a lot of towns still don't want you in the building. So there's an online FOIL request that you can fill out. 2 or 3 days later, they will email you the copy of the hard paper documents in their file. Know if there's a survey on file before, before you get too far into the transaction, so you can let the bank know what violations might be in there. To really just, whether you call the town, whether you go online, fill out the FOIL, or John, in terms of Carmel, there is a site that I can email you. You can check all Putnam County records. It's not Carmel specific, it's Putnam County specific. That you can also do digitally and online. So just a reminder.
Got it. Thank you. And just one other thing that I would suggest, Debbie, you mentioned before about having the team in place. That's something that I won't even begin doing showings until my buyer has told me that they have all of their team in place, because as we mentioned before, there's nothing binding. So we don't have time for you to get an accepted offer and then start vetting for an attorney or an inspector and reading reviews, things of that nature. So what we do in a buyer's consultation is we give them a list of vendors that we work with and we feel comfortable with, and we start asking them to start the process of vetting who they would like to work with. Because in New York, once you got that accepted offer, you got to be ready to do inspections the next day if possible, and sign contracts within the day or two after that. Because unfortunately, a cash offer comes in above yours, we lost one last week after inspections were done. And that's just how it goes.
So we have had kind of the same scenario with a gap before we know that we have a solid deal in a contract in Connecticut. It's more so in New York. When do you know you have a solid deal in New York for a
When you
buyer?
sign contract.
When contracts are fully executed, that's the only time, when both parties have signed. Anything before that, it's still fair game.
And what is a realistic expectation of timing on that? From offer and accepted offer to fully executed contract? What should you expect?
I mean, I wouldn't put an expectation on that, because there's a lot of listing agents that just don't work ethically. And that's just the bottom line. They're very unethical. They'll give you a verbal accepted offer, and they won't even give you the proper time to do your due diligence. So that's another thing that I will explain to my clients in the buyer's consultation, that we're not here to rush you, but we do have to do our due diligence as quickly as possible, because this is what can happen. So realistically, you'd want to get that done within 4 or 5 days of the accepted offer, because anyone can come in at any time and steal the deal, essentially.
Okay. And again, the contract process is the seller's attorney creates the contract and delivers it to the buyer's attorney? That's the same, right?
Correct.
And then the buyer will sign it first. Okay,
Correct.
cool. All right, are we ready to move on to sellers? We've got a couple of fun things with sellers as well. First of all, what's the first required document for sellers?
New York
That's the one.
agency.
The disclosure.
Agency disclosure. Same disclosure,
Mhm.
different boxes checked. And then we go to the ERS, the exclusive right to sell. And it has a couple of different clauses in it as well. So where's my ERS? It is.
Debbie, while you're pulling that up, I will just remind everyone, fair housing also.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what? Thank you for that, because I had not been aware of that. And I will, when we go to the document section on MLS, we'll find that, I hope. We'll look for it. Okay, so let me get you guys over here. And looks pretty familiar, right? It's a legally binding contract. And it has the same identification of the participants and the property address and the price and the terms. Here we have something that's a little bit new. Who wants to talk about the different types of representation in New York? So we have compensation for seller's agents, broker's agents, or buyer's agents.
Go ahead, Dee.
Okay, so where are we here? The owner hereby the listing agent, a total commission of whatever your total is, 5-6% goes there of the selling price, and the cooperating selling, the
We
cooperating.
know what, we practice with seller's agents here, right? Seller's agent is,
Whatever your percentage is.
well, and seller's agent carries with it vicarious liability, right? So typically, I don't
Oh, the
offer,
cooperating broker, sorry, I read that wrong.
right,
Right,
Right.
Right, sorry.
Buyer's agent.
Agent is
one thing,
straightforward, yeah.
But what the heck is this broker's agent?
It's the same thing. I went over this with Rick. So I feel like I have a little bit of an advantage. He said to me, the buyer's and the broker's agent, you put in the same thing.
But who is a broker's agent? What's the difference between a broker's agent and a buyer's agent?
He said that,
I don't know.
even
the answer.
know.
he told me it's the same thing. The broker's agent is the same as the buyer's agent.
So my understanding,
Go ahead,
And
Christine. You go
my,
ahead.
my understanding, but by all means validate this because I just put zeros in. Right, I'm paying the buyer's agent and the listing agent. But my understanding is, let's say Keller Williams takes on this contract, and for whatever reason, we decide we don't want the listing, and so we sub it out to a different broker. How much of the compensation would go to that? I can't tell you that's true or not true, but that is what I have been told.
Oh, see, and I see this differently. This is just cooperating. It's like what we put on the BAC on
Right.
our documents in Connecticut.
So that, yeah,
And that's always buyer's agent.
Right.
What I believe is seller's agent is going to have an agreement only to represent the seller. And this is the old fashioned way of practicing, and it creates vicarious liability for our sellers.
so that's
I
a
always put
zero.
a zero
Zero
in
there.
that space, that I'm not interested in working with a seller's agent. What I believe is the broker's agent is an agent who is affiliated with a broker in the state of New York
And
and
that's,
is not a specific buyer's agent. He doesn't have a specific agency agreement with the buyer. This is all cooperating
How would
broker
he be compensated?
compensation, right? Does that make sense?
yes,
Okay. And then the rest of this is fairly similar. They do make this a little bit clearer than it is on our Connecticut forms. And it gives our permission for sale signs.
and you have to know
Oh,
the
there's
town.
another topic. There's
And you
another.
have to know the town.
Hold that on the side.
Okay,
A lockbox. And then this is an interesting one. Does or does not give permission to share keys to the property in the event that you do not have a lockbox. So sometimes you have to go collect the keys, and that's the specific permission granting there. You have the opportunity to make it a rental property. And what I want to get to is this down at the bottom of the document where it talks about, we've got property condition and the Home Equity Theft Protection Act. We do not have this in Connecticut documents. Who wants to talk a little bit about that? So I'll just, in the sake of time, I will just say the way I represent this to a seller in New York is that I ask the question, are you current on your mortgage? That's what that's the whole clause is talking about. You're not in default, you're not late. Are you current on your mortgage? And as I'm going through this document, which I do line by line, that question needs to be answered. It used to also need to be initialed. It looks like you don't have to initial that clause anymore. And then property condition disclosure. Let's spend just a moment on this again, because as a seller, this is a decision point, a decision time for them. Their option is if they don't fill it out, they'll pay $500 to the buyer, same as Connecticut. Would you say you have more disclosures in New York or fewer disclosures signed by the seller in New York?
Way fewer.
Yeah.
agreed.
But everybody does have to sign lead if it's applicable.
Almost never.
Right. Yeah. When Dee and I were talking about this, yeah, we said it's probably 1% do sign in New York, and in Connecticut, it's 1% who don't sign.
Right.
It's like completely backwards.
Mhm.
But
And-
again, I just want to reiterate that the conversation around the property condition disclosures is to have the conversation with your attorney.
Yes,
Mhm.
I'm just making you aware that these are the two options.
correct.
There
Yes.
is a
Well,
separate and mandatory document called property condition agent affirmation that needs to be signed as part of this listing process that says, I informed you of this, and the seller signs back. saying, yes, I'm aware of this.
Okay, that's
I either
fabulous.
fill this out or I pay the $500. And that is a document that you would have signed at the same time as this agreement.
Okay. And then everything else is very much the same. It does specify at the bottom the difference between exclusive right to sell, which this is, and an exclusive agency. And exclusive right to sell specifically says, whoever finds the buyer for your house, you get to pay us a commission. An exclusive agency, of course, is they reserve the right to find their own buyer, in which case they just pay you the listing side of the commission. But this is an exclusive right. Okay, any questions around that? So signage, we tripped down that path. What's the story with signage on a listing in New York?
Each municipality is different.
And what are some of the options?
A sign right on your property, no sign. There might be like for sale by broker. That's maybe like in a couple of areas. And open house signs are the same thing. Check before you do an open house. I call the police department to make sure.
Really?
Yep.
Isn't that interesting? Okay. Yeah.
Some municipalities like Scarsdale and Bronxville, they even have regulations regarding the size of the signs. So they can't be with, beyond a certain size. So strongly recommend checking before you list to find out what the regulations are for signage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It sounds like this is not a last minute effort. You need to plan for listing property in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fabulous. We also talked a little bit about water. So let's just review that, because the seller has an obligation to do water testing in New York. And it sounded like it's not all of New York. I know it's Westchester.
Westchester, and there's part of Fishkill, right, Christine? That there's a panel of water testing that they are required to do with a certain, and the home inspectors in New York are very much aware.
Right. So, and when does it have to be done by? So just from a time
I
perspective,
believe it's good
how
for
do you
6
schedule all
months.
this?
I believe it's good for 6 months.
And has to be done within 10 days of the signed contract that the water is full. So you can do it before you list. And that would be my recommendation, because not a lot of people who have well water are testing their water on a regular basis, right?
Right.
So
And
you
it's
might
not,
as well find out before the buyer does whether or not you have the bacteria, shock the well, and then have the correction by the time
Right.
you list it.
right.
But
Great
that said,
recommendation.
if the seller wants to wait, the contract will say, once you have this fully executed contract, the seller will pull the water within 10 days.
Okay. And it's not just potability. They're doing VOCs, right? Is that part of that testing? And
Yes.
yet they're not doing a full complement of water testing. They're not doing radon, for example.
No.
Right. Basically, IBM did some bad stuff back in the 70s. And so Westchester, as a county, made the decision that they want everyone with well water to run a certain panel of tests so that they can track where the contamination is going or growing. So that was the start of it. And they've not discontinued it, even though it really is no longer an issue.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know that background. That's great. And it makes sense.
Yeah, they did some dumping.
Mhm. I want to show you where you're going to find a lot of these forms, and it's like, holy cow. So you see, this is the dashboard of One Key. And when you scroll down, just like on Smart MLS, you have a link for forms and documents. And that's going to take you to a table of contents for all kinds of forms. There's a form for, did somebody sneeze on the porch on this house? I swear to heaven, I swear. So here's the whole list of categories of forms. No joke.
Wow.
So you've got all of these things to go through.
There's
What you're
there's
most,
fair housing, if you wanna.
yes, there's our fair housing document. So that will probably be where we have the disclosure for fair housing. Someplace in here, you're going to find that. I'll let you find that on your own. And down here, we have the MLS listing agreements and forms. That's where I just pulled up that ERS. What I want to show you here is the MLS input forms, because I had not seen these earlier. And sure enough, you're going to find input forms for MLS data, so that you can collect that data just as conveniently as we do for Connecticut listings. And of course, it has all different versions of, land listings, condo listings, co-op listings. Let's just talk real briefly about co-ops, because they tend to be more prevalent in New York than they are in Connecticut. And who has some tips as far as listing a co-op or selling a co-op and setting expectations for that event?
I don't do co-op.
I
I don't even know.
I unfortunately have plenty of experience with them, and I can attest to why these ladies have made the great decision to not do them anymore. They are a nuisance, to be brutally honest, on either side, listing side or buying side.
Both.
One thing that I would strongly suggest, especially on the listing side, is stand firm on whatever charge, whatever compensation you charge. 6%. You're going to work for your 6%. And I strongly suggest you fight for that, because the boards are tough. So on the listing side, one thing I would strongly recommend is, before you list, speak with management and find out what the board requirements are. Some of the board requirements, they will have a specific DTI percentage requirement. They'll have a specific income requirement. They'll have a credit score requirement. So those are things that I would strongly recommend you speak to management about before listing, because you want to really vet every buyer that submits an offer, because the last thing that you want to do is accept an offer and then go through the process and then the board denies them. So strongly suggest you find out if the board has any specific requirements on DTI, income, and credit. And then I would even disclose that in your listing notes, sell agent notes, to just say, DTI requirement, no more than 30%, credit requirement, income, just so that it's very clear up front, because it's unfortunate that, you can get denied and not get an explanation as to why your buyer was denied.
So John, it sounds like co-op boards can be dictatorial. Do I have that right?
Absolutely.
And what about asking for a waiver or a review or a whatever?
No.
Get it?
So they proposed a bill where the co-op boards were supposed to be providing an explanation when there was a rejection. That got turned down. The only thing that I know of that has recently changed is they now have a 30-day window to provide you, from acceptance of your physical paper application, they have a 30-day window to give you an actual board interview date. Because before, that was also something that was just up in the air. They could give you a date next week. It could be in 45 days. They really govern themselves. So there's not really much you can do in terms of how they do things. But That's the only thing that's really changed. That you have 30 days to give you a date on your actual board interview from when your application is complete and received.
Okay. We have just 2 minutes before Quantum Leap is going to start. I do want to hit on STAR and taxes because that too is different in New York. Who wants to take that?
So STAR is a tax reduction program that buyers or homeowners have to apply for, and there's a certain date when they have to apply for it. We as listing agents are not allowed to put the taxes without STAR, and some of the municipalities won't even tell you what the taxes are. They give you a formula and you have to figure it out yourself. And with the STAR in the agent notes or in the the buyer notes, you can put like, this does not include STAR deduction of blah, blah, blah. And there's other STAR, there's like senior STAR, there's all different kinds of, there's homestead. I don't even know what homestead is, but people have it.
So where do we go to get that data so that we're sure that we're at least on track to represent that correctly? Is there a link? Is it a local link?
I call the municipality.
Debbie,
Yeah.
you can call the municipality. You can contact Rich O'Donnell, he's a tax assessor.
Yeah.
Westchester, he can get tax records. And also within the MLS itself, there's an app within it called Realist Tax.
Yeah.
It'll give you a tax record as well. But I always will write in the listing notes, buyer's agent should verify as well, because there's no way to guarantee that those numbers are accurate.
Okay, that's great.
Including square footage.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Well, that's true anywhere on square footage. I
Wow,
find.
that's great.
They don't even list it on some of the, like the tax cards and things. And I mean, somebody sent me a tax like a
Field card, a field card.
field card, thank you, that was from the year of the flood. I mean, it was handwritten, it was over. I couldn't figure out what it was. I was like, I'll come and measure your house. So
I have found though, calling the municipality has been very helpful in general for me, and they usually give me the information you need.
And did I hear right, John, you're talking about a county-wide tax person? County-wide as well as the municipality?
Yeah, so his name is Rich O'Donnell. He's actually one of the top sponsors. He does a lot of sponsorship for HGAR and One Key. He's been a sponsor with them for a while, but he's a retired tax assessor.
oh, that guy.
So yeah, so you can contact him and
Okay.
he'll give you, I use him all the time. I use him a lot for my buyers as well, because he'll tell you where the taxes were previous year, and based on the current purchase price, if there's ability for a grievance there, and he'll give you an idea of how much of a grievance is possible. So it's a good tool to have, but he gives you really accurate information.
Can you
Excellent.
send that information to Debbie and she can forward it on?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's good. Thank you.
Thank
And I'm
you.
going to thank you all. Oh, my gosh. I learned a lot of things here from
So
you.
did I.
Oh, my
Thank you,
gosh.
Christine
And-
and John and Dee.
Yeah, right. So much. I really appreciate your time. I hope everybody else felt it was worthwhile. And